האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov, Dobrev Yetzer, good evening. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Ki Tisa. We're going to do Drush Yud Aleph, section number 11. Before we begin, we're going to take a look at two psukim. The first pasuk goes all the way back to Parshas Mishpatim, but it'll sound familiar. Very well-known pasuk. And the second pasuk will be from our Parsha of Ki Tisa relating to the Egel HaZohav, the golden calf. So let's start with the Parsha in Mishpatim. This is Shmos Perek Chav Dalid, Pasuk Zayin. Vayikach sefer habris. And Moshe took the book of the covenant, Vayikra be'oznei ha'am, and he read it into the ears of the nation. Vayomru, and they said, Kol asher diber Hashem, everything that Hashem has spoken, na'aseh v'nishma. We will do everything that Hashem speaks, we will do, and we will listen. Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do, and we will listen. So that's the pasuk back in Parshas Mishpatim that brings us the famous phrase Na'aseh v'nishma, and that's what the Jewish people said at that moment, at that time. Now a little bit of a less joyous pasuk from our Parsha regarding the Egel Hazav in Parshas Ki Tisa. This is Perek Lamed Beis, Pasuk Dalet. This is from the middle of the story of the people demanding that Aharon the Kohen Gadol make them a golden calf. So it says, Vayikach miyodam. Aharon took from the gold from their hands, Vayatzar oso bacheret, and he formed it in a mold. Vayaasehu egel masecha, and he made it into a molten calf. Vayomru, and then the people said, Eile Elohecha Yisrael, this is your God, O Yisrael, O Israel. Asher he'elucha me'eretz Mitzrayim, that brought you up from the land of Mitzrayim. So without even getting into the piece or saying anything at all, except on a simple level, obviously we're reading here two psukim that take us from great heights, great spiritual heights, the heights of Na'aseh and Nishma. We will do and we will listen, total commitment and devotion to Hashem. And then we're plummeting down to the depths of the golden calf. So let's take a look at the Zera Shimshon's comment section, Yud Aleph, number 11. Medrash Rabbah. The Medrash Rabbah comments, Al Pasuk HaNizkar La'el, on a Pasuk which has been mentioned previously, Vayiten El Moshe Kechalo So. The Medrash Rabbah is commenting on the Pasuk about Moshe about Hashem giving to Moshe when he finished speaking to him, giving him the luchos. So the Medrash Rabbah quotes Lecha Hashem Hatzedakah, and the pasuk finishes Vilanu Boshes Haponim. It's a pasuk from Daniel, as you can see in the parentheses. To you, Hashem is the righteousness, and to us is the embarrassment. What does that pasuk mean? What is it alluding to, that Hashem has the righteousness and we have the embarrassment? It was very appropriate for our forefathers when they said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. That was very appropriate. When Hashem did the charitable and righteous act of giving us the luchos and the Torah, so that was a great act of righteousness, and it was appropriate to respond, Na'aseh v'nishma. That's L'cha Hashem Hatzedakah. And then the Medrash Rabbah continues, next column on the left. Shema ha'yanoeh lomar, but was it perhaps appropriate to say, Eile Elohecha Yisrael, this is your God, O Israel, referring to the Egel HaZohav, the golden calf? Was that appropriate? And that's the end of the quote from the Medrash Rabbah. So the Medrash Rabbah seems to be highlighting the fact that we pointed out, a very straightforward point that we made right after we read the two psukim, that on the one hand, there was a tremendous high point, a spiritual high point of closeness to Hashem when Hashem gave us the Luchos and the Torah at Har Sinai, and we said Naseh v'nishma. That was Noeh. That was a very wonderful and appropriate moment. And then we have the moment of the Egel HaZohav, which was not Noeh. It was not appropriate. It was not fitting. It was not a good moment for the Jewish people. And that seems to be what the Medrash Rabbah is pointing out. But the Zera Shimshon says, kosher, this is difficult. This little excerpt in the Medrash Rabbah is problematic. Because is it not so, hatinoko shel beis rabban, that little children who are learning in the cheder, little children who are learning in yeshiva, yodim, they know, shezeh noeh, v'zeh eino noeh. Even little children can tell you that Naseh v'nishma was a great moment and a wonderful thing for the Jewish people to say, and Eila Elohecha Yisrael about the golden calf was the opposite, was a very low noah, very not appropriate, not nice moment for Bnei Yisrael. So since even little children know it, why did the Medrash Rabbah feel that it was necessary to point that out? That there must be more to this statement than meets the eye. We don't need the Medrash Rabbah to tell us Naseh v'nishma was great, Egel HaZohav was bad. That we get. We all have got that. Even little children get that. And so there must be more to this statement in the Medrash Rabbah, and that's what the Zera Shimshon is going to delve into. And in fact, he's going to offer us two very different approaches to understand what the Medrash Rabbah is attempting to teach us. So let's go to the next page, column on the right. This is approach number one. V'yesh lomar, and we can say, Yesh salka dato lomar, that one might have thought to say, Shema she'omru naseh v'nishma, that when the Jewish people said we will do and we will hearken, eino kol kach noeh legamre, that was not completely and absolutely a fitting thing to say. One might think that one might actually question the Naaseh v'nishma statement. V'chein ma she'amru eile Elohecha Yisrael, and similarly, the statement made regarding the Egel HaZohav, this is your God, O Israel, eino kol kach, eino noeh legamre. It is not completely and totally inappropriate. So the Zera Shimshon already here in the beginning of this paragraph lays out what his approach will be. He hasn't explained it yet. He hasn't filled in the blanks, but he says, obviously the Medrash Rabbah felt that there was something that seemed a little bit off about Naseh v'nishma, and that's why it had to say, no, Naseh v'nishma was Noah, was very appropriate. And also that there was something a little bit good, a little bit of a silver lining about Eile Elohecha Yisrael, about what they said about the golden calf. And so that's why it had to reassert and emphasize, no, the golden calf, even though perhaps we can see a little sliver of light there, nonetheless, a little silver lining, nonetheless, it was very bad. So that's the approach. And now he's going to begin to fill in those blanks. Shehatam she'omru zichronom livracha. The reason that Chazal said, and this comes, as you can see, from the parentheses from a Gemara in Maseches Kiddushin, Godol hamitzuveh ve'oseh, a person who is commanded to do a certain mitzvah, ve'oseh, and does that mitzvah, is greater, that's considered greater, mimi she'eino mitzuveh ve'oseh, than someone who is not commanded to do that mitzvah and does it anyway. So let's pause. This is actually a famous argument in the Gemara, and this is what the Gemara concludes with this statement, which for some people is very surprising when they hear it the first time. The Gemara concludes that it is greater the person who is commanded to do something and does it is considered greater than the person who is not commanded and does that mitzvah and fulfills that commandment. Even though you might think the opposite. You might think if a person isn't even commanded and does it, wow, that shows incredible commitment because they didn't even have to do it. The person who does it, who's commanded and does it, well, he's doing what he's supposed to do. But the other guy didn't even have to do it and he did it. But the Gemara says the opposite. No, it's greater to do a mitzvah that you're commanded to do than to do a mitzvah that you're not commanded to do. Why is that? Hainu mishum, this is because the mishahu mitzuveh, someone who's commanded to do a certain action, yesh lo yetzer hara takif. That person has a very powerful evil inclination, hame'akvo milahasos, which tries to prevent him from doing the mitzvah. Hoil she'im eno ose yesh lo onesh. Since if he doesn't do this action that he's commanded to do, there'll be punishment, there'll be a negative consequence. So the Yetzer Hara sees a situation where a person, a man or a woman, is commanded, is obligated to do a certain mitzvah. And the Yetzer Hara knows, you know what, this person maybe generally is not so careful about mitzvahs, but they're going to definitely want to do this mitzvah because if not, there could be a punishment, there could be a negative consequence to them. And the person, Yetzer Hara says the person knows that. So they're going to be investing energy and time into making sure they fulfill this commandment. So therefore, the Yetzer Hara figures, I've got to really up my game. I've got to really get tough with this person to convince him or her not to do this mitzvah. So when the person is commanded to do a mitzvah, the Yetzer Hara gets to work. But someone who is not commanded to do a mitzvah and nonetheless does that mitzvah, ein lo kol kach Yetzer Hara. He doesn't have a strong, powerful Yetzer Hara trying to prevent him from doing it. Ve'eno tzorech lehisgaber al Yitro, and he doesn't have to strengthen himself or herself to overcome a powerful Yetzer Hara. She'eno kol kach me'akvo milasos, because the Yetzer Hara is not working so hard to prevent this individual from doing the mitzvah, since after all, they're not commanded to do the mitzvah. Ulefum tzara agra, and according to the pain and the trouble is the reward. That, of course, is a famous line from Pirkei Avot, from the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. According to how hard a person works and how difficult it is to do something, how many obstacles there are, according to that, how much energy, time, effort they put in, that is commensurate with the reward that they receive, with the schar or the agra that they receive for doing the mitzvah. So the Zera Shimshon starts, as he often does, by giving us a yesod, teaching us a principle. And here the principle is that it's greater, that a person gets more reward for doing a mitzvah that he or she is commanded to do than someone who does a mitzvah that they are not obligated to do. And the reason is, when you do a mitzvah you're commanded to do, you have to fight against your Yetzer Hara, who's doing everything he can. Yetzer Hara is doing everything it can, I should say, to prevent you from doing the mitzvah. And that means when you overcome the Yetzer Hara and you do the mitzvah, you get more reward. It's greater, a greater accomplishment than when you're not commanded to do it, and the Yetzer Hara doesn't care so much, not working so hard to prevent you from doing things that you're not even commanded to do. The Yetzer Hara doesn't need to get up early to stop you from doing something you're not commanded to do. It's not a mitzvah for you anyway. So therefore, you don't get as much schar, as reward, when you accomplish it. It's not considered as great an accomplishment. That's the idea he's developed so far. Next paragraph. In Cain, if so, Yisrael shehikdimu na'aseh l'nishma, the Jewish people who said the word "we will do" before they said the word "we will listen," efshar shekavonosam hayisa, it's possible that their intention was liyos bichlal misha eno mitzuva ve'oseh. It's possible to think that maybe what they had in mind was, we want to be treated like someone who is not commanded to do a mitzvah and does it anyway. shelo yishlot bahem yetzer hara, because we don't want to have to deal with the power of our yetzer hara. Umishum hachi amru naseh, and that's why they said first we will do below shmiya kodem, without even hearing the mitzvah. The hainu shum tzivoy, which means they would do the mitzvahs. They were expressing their desire to do the mitzvahs without hearing the commands to do the mitzvahs. Well, if you don't hear the command, you're not a mitzvah. You're not obligated to do it. And if you're not obligated to do it, Yetzer Hara won't be fighting you as much. So maybe that's what the people meant. V'zeh eino kol kach noeh lohem. And that was not such a fitting thought to have. Because with that in mind, it would appear that they weren't willing to work so hard to serve their Creator. If the people actually had in mind, we want to do the mitzvos before we hear them, because then we'll be treated like someone who's eino mitzvah ve'osa, not obligated in doing the mitzvos anyway, and therefore our Yetzer Hara won't be working so hard to prevent us from doing the mitzvah. That means they didn't want to work so hard. They didn't want to struggle. They didn't want to battle. Aval, however, in kol zeh, nonetheless, mitzad acher, from the other perspective, hayanoeh lohem lomar, it was, of course, very appropriate and fitting for them to say, very proper for them to say, Nasev and Ishma, these great words, these famous words, we will do and we will listen, Shenire Yoser, because these words make it appear more zehirus uzrizos, that they had more care and alacrity la'avodas boram, to serve their Creator. When you imagine you go to tell your child, as an example, or you could say an employee, you go to tell someone that you want them to do something, and you begin explaining what you want them to do. And before you can even explain it, they say, "Oh, I'm ready to do it. Just tell me. I'm ready. I'm here. I'm ready. I'm raring to go. Want me to clean up my room? I'm already on it. Want me to clean the table? I'm already on it. Want me to babysit my little brothers and sisters? Whatever it is you want your children to do, they're already jumping on it before you even have a chance to explain it. That shows zihirus and zrizus. That shows great commitment, devotion, and passion about doing the mitzvot. So nasev and ishma, absolutely, we come down on the side of reaffirming what a great thing that was for the Jewish people to say. But the Zera Shimshon has shown us that from a certain perspective, from a certain aspect, you might have suspected that there was a little bit of an ulterior motive there on the part of the Jewish people, or maybe some of the Jewish people, who were thinking, you know what, better to commit to do the mitzvahs before we even hear them, because then we have the whole short-circuiting the Yetzer Hara, who won't bother us if we're not commanded to do the mitzvahs, if we haven't yet heard what the mitzvahs are. So even though that aspect is true, it exists, Medrash Rabbah wants to reassert, no, it was good and appropriate and wonderful that they said Nasev and Ishma, but it was teaching us to kind of overlook this other concern. Next paragraph. V'hine b'matan Torah ksiv. Now we'll look at it from the other side, from the side of the golden calf. V'hine b'matan Torah ksiv. Regarding the giving of the Torah, it is written, Charus al haluchos, that the words of the Aseres Hadibros, the 10 Commandments, were carved on the tablets. The Omru Zichronim Levracha in Chazal said, this is a very famous statement in Chazal, this word charus, engraved or carved, can be read as cherus, freedom. When the Jewish people accepted the words that were carved on the luchos, they attained cherus, freedom, mimaloch hamoves umiyetzer hara, from the angel of death and from the Yetzer Hara. Amazing statement by Chazal, incredible statement. When the Jewish people accepted the Aseres Adibros at Har Sinai, all of the sudden, poof, no more concern about death and dying, and no more concern about the Yetzer Hara. That they broke through to the other side, so to speak. Suddenly, their entire reality, their entire experience of life was transformed to one in which there was no Malach HaMaves and there was no Yetzer Hara. Incredible. Aval Osu Ha'egel, however, when they made the golden calf, when they fell from those great heights, those lofty heights of Nasev and Ishma, and they made the golden calf, Chazar Yetzer Hara L'Makomo, the Yetzer Hara, and the Malach HaMavis return. We're moved to the top of the column on the left now, return to their place. They came back. We had such a golden, incredible moment and such an incredible opportunity to go forward with total closeness to Hashem, without a Yetzer Hara, without a Malach HaMaves, and we blew it with the Egel HaZahav. Ulefi zeh, and according to this, ha'avoda sheyasu laboram achrechen, the service that the Jewish people did for Hashem, for their Creator, afterwards, after the Egel HaZahav, meaning after the Yetzer Hara and the Malach HaMavis were returned to life, to be a regular part of life. After that happened, whenever the Jewish people did a mitzvah and served Hashem, Yiyeh Yoser b'Torah u'va'amal, it was with more effort. It required more effort and more work and labor, right? Because now they do have to overcome their Yetzer Hara. It had disappeared for a while. It was very easy to do mitzvahs during the gap of time, the period, the window of time when the Yetzer Hara disappeared. It was very easy to do mitzvahs. There was no Yetzer Hara stopping people at all from doing mitzvahs. So people were grabbing mitzvahs like they were low-hanging fruit. All of a sudden, Egel HaZahav happens, Yetzer Hara comes back, and now it's back to being hard. You have to fight to do mitzvos. It's not the low-hanging fruit anymore. But because of this, their reward for fighting hard to overcome the Yetzer Hara and do mitzvos became doubled and quadrupled. Because according to the effort is the reward. They had to work so much harder. Avolim kol zeh, but even so, with all of this newfound insight, mitzad acher, from the other perspective, eino noah lahem, it of course was not good for them, lasos chet gadol kazeh, to do this terrible, terrible sin of the golden calf. So let's pause here for a moment before we go forward. So, as we said in the beginning of this piece, the Zera Shimshon felt that there must be more to the statement in the Medrash Rabbah when it said it was good for the people to say Nasev and Ishma, but it was bad for them to say Eile Elohecha Yisrael about the golden calf. Like, okay, we got it. That's pretty simple. You got to, Zera Shimshon said, it's got to be teaching us something else. So now he has shown us that both statements, the Nasev and Ishma and the Eile Elohecha Yisrael, have a little aspect, a little piece of something unexpected. Nasev and Ishma has a possible bad aspect to it, a negative aspect, a low noah aspect, and Eile Elohecha Yisrael of the golden calf has a little bit of a positive aspect that we can see, that we can understand when we look at it on a deeper, more analytical level. And that's what the Zera Shimshon has explained to us so far. Now he's going to bring that point home. V'im kain, next paragraph, if so, Yofel Omar HaMedrash, then the Medrash Rabbah was saying a beautiful idea. Noeh ha'yolahem lomar nasev v'nishma. It was wonderful that the people said, we will do and we will listen, hagam, even though shemitzad echad eino noeh. From a certain angle, it didn't appear good. Shema ha'yenoah lomar Eile Elohecha Yisrael, and was it? And when the Medrash Rabbah said, was it good for them not to say, this is your God, O Israel? Yes, of course, that was bad. Afal pisha mitzad echad me'at noah. Even though the Medrash Rabbah was saying it was bad, even though from a certain angle it had an element of possible goodness to it, okay? So the Zera Shimshon could definitely stop here. He's completely answered his question and explained the Medrash Rabbah in a very wonderful way. that we can understand. However, as we said in the beginning, he was going to give two approaches. So that's the end of the first approach. And now he's going to give a totally different approach, which means we need to clear our minds completely of what the Zera Shimshon explained to us and not try to take it carry it over into what he's going to say now moving forward. He wants us to say, wow, that was great, but the first explanation is over. We're starting from ground zero, and we are going to give a totally different way of looking at the Medrash Rabbah statement. Next paragraph. V'od yesh lomar. Alternatively, we can say, shemachshava ro'a ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzarfa l'maaseh. Another quote from Chazal. This you can see is also from Maseches Kiddushin. When a person has a bad thought, meaning specifically they have a thought to do something that goes against the Torah. When a person thinks, doesn't do yet, but just thinks about doing something that would go against the will of Hashem, the Ratzon of Hashem, and go against the Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not treat that machshava, that thought, as if it's an action. HaKadosh Baruch Hu could do that. HaKadosh Baruch Hu could say, okay, you didn't do an action yet, but why are you thinking such bad thoughts about such terrible actions? I'm going to punish the person for these bad thoughts. So the Gemara in Kedushin says, no, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not consider bad thoughts to be alone, bad thoughts alone. He doesn't consider them, doesn't treat them as if the person did the actual bad action, right? Doesn't mean it's good to have bad thoughts. Of course, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't work hard to scrub our machshavos, to clean them and purify them so we don't have bad thoughts about going against Hashem's will. Of course, that's true. But Hashem doesn't treat us mercifully. Hashem doesn't treat us when we have a bad thought and think about doing something wrong. Hashem doesn't consider it as if we actually did the bad thing. V'afal pi sheb'mamed Har Sinai, even though when the Jewish people were standing at Har Sinai, ksiv, a pasuk in Tehillim says about that, vayifatuhu bifihem. They persuaded Hashem with their mouths. Very, very unusual pasuk in Tehillim that says at Har Sinai, we paid lip service to what Hashem was telling us. When we said specifically, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen, those words spoke of complete devotion and commitment, but the pasuk in Tehillim says we were only trying to persuade Hashem that we were sincere, but we were already thinking, or at least some people were already thinking about making an Egel HaZohav, a golden calf. Terrible, terrible, but that's what Chazal teach us, and that's based on a pasuk in Tehillim. In kol zeh, nonetheless, noah Elohem lomar na'aseh v'nishma b'fihem. Nonetheless, it was a good thing for them to say the words na'aseh v'nishma. Why? Because even though some people were already thinking about making a golden calf, it was just a machshava at that point. It was just a thought, and we just learned, the Zera Shimshon just taught us that from Chazal, that when you have a negative thought, that the Hashem doesn't consider that as if you did the negative action. Okay, you had a negative thought. So even though they were thinking about an Egel HaZohav, making an Egel HaZohav, they certainly hadn't done it yet. And so it was good that they said Na'aseh v'nishma. Next paragraph. Omnum, however, achar kach, afterwards, misha osu amaseh, when they did in fact make the Egel HaZohav, Oz, then afa machshava nechsheves lachet. Then the thinking about making the Egel HaZohav is considered a chet. The haidi amrinon she'ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzarfa lemaseh, because the statement we brought down from Chazal before, that Hashem doesn't consider a thinking about an act as if it's acting, hainu im lo yechteh, that only is true if you don't actually go through with your thoughts and turn them into actions and do the actions. But if you do the actions, then Hashem does in fact start your sin from when you had the thought. So a person who thinks about doing an Aveira, and then they do the Aveira, Hashem says, okay, this is all one big sin. This is terrible. You thought about it, you planned it, you focused on it, and then you did it. That's all combined for sinful thinking and actions. It's only when you think about it, but then do not. You pull yourself back, you pull yourself away from the brink, and you don't do the action. Only then does Hashem say, okay, you just had a thought, you slipped up, you're only human. I'm not going to treat it as if you actually did the act. But in the case of Bnei Yisrael, the people who thought about making an Egel Azov, unfortunately, tragically, they followed through and they made an Egel Azov. V'lochein Omar, and therefore it says, Kishechotu v'omru Eila Elohecha Yisrael, when they actually did do the sin of making a golden calf and they proclaimed, this is your God, O Israel, ulamafreya choshev aleim hakodesh baruch hu chet hamachshava, because they followed through in their thoughts and they made the Egel Azov, retroactively Hashem took into account their original thoughts about making a golden calf, and he considered that the beginning of the sin. So the Medrash Rabbah was saying, perhaps, is it possible to think that the fact that in the beginning they said Nasev and Ishma, even though some of them were thinking about making an Egel Azov, and then they actually did make an Egel Azov? No, that is not considered a good thing or a meritorious thing. V'ayin l'komun perish acher b'parshas Ekev al posuk zechor al tishkach es asher hiktavta, and you can even look later on and see a different explanation about this in the Zera Shimshon's commentary on Parshas Ekev, on the pasuk of zechor al tishkach es asher hiktavta, remember and don't forget how you tested and angered Hashem. So the second approach, as we mentioned, is a totally different approach. It completely, radically changes what the Medrash Rabbah is saying. And the second approach, the Medrash Rabbah is saying, you know how great Nasev and Ishma was? That's reaffirmed. Yes, that was great. Because at the time they said it, they only had a machshava. Some people only had a machshava about making the Egel Hazov, and that machshava at that point didn't shake things up. It didn't count for anything. It wasn't considered connected to any actions at that point when they said Nasev and Ishma. So it was noah, it was wonderful. However, later on, when they acted on their thought about making an Egel Hazov, then we have to go back and say you were completely insincere. You said the words lip service. You said Nasev and Ishmak because you were trying to convince Hashem that you wanted to receive the Torah without any reservations. But some of you at that very moment of Nasev and Ishmak, at that very high point, you were already thinking about rebelling against Hashem, chas v'sholem, and making the Egel Hazohav, and that means that going back, once you followed through on your thoughts and you did the action, that took away everything from your original statement. So your Eile Elohecha Yisrael, what you said about the golden calf after you made it, knocks out the reward and the merit that you would have received from Naseh V'Nishma. So kind of a striking and hard approach to a harder way of understanding the words of the Medrash Rabbah. Yasher Koch for joining in the learning in the Zera Shimshon this week on Parshas Ki Tisa. Be'ezus Hashem, we will learn together again next week on next week's Parsha.